Well, hello, and an extremely warm welcome to my channel. My name is Louise, and I love musing about books, and in particular, I love musing about books on a horrible, murky day, which is what it is outside. I've already been through on a stomp through the forest this morning in the murk and mist, and I've come back to talk about the 10 books that really got me buzzing this year. An extremely warm welcome if you're a returning viewer, and a very, very warm welcome too if you are viewing my channel for the very first time. So I really look forward to this every year, choosing my favourite books, and I don't think I managed to stick to 10 in any of the previous videos I've made. And I wasn't expecting to do it today because this has been, or well, it's last year now, 2025 has been one of the best reading years I can remember for a very, very long time. I've thoroughly enjoyed everything I've read, right up to the nail as well. So one of the books that's in my top 10 I only read just as the year was finishing. So, you know, I thought there's no way I'm going to be able to whittle it down. And actually, really, I probably ought to make another video about the books that didn't make it into the top 10. But once I'd sort of thought about it and made several different lists, I realised that there were 10 that really stood out for me. And just to be really clear, these are books that I have read this year. They're not books necessarily that were published this year. In fact, I think very few of them were. So that this is solely based on my own reading and solely based on my reading of fiction. I just wanted to clarify that before I go any further. It's not going to be very good, is it, if I can't get my words out? So without further ado, and I am going to rank them. I don't think I ranked them last year either, but I had a look and I thought, yeah, I think I probably can rank order these. Although, like anything, on a different day with a different mood, I might put them in a different order. Now, I'm sort of just having a little bit of a moment looking at the pile of books, which I very neatly piled up to the left of my phone before recording this, and they've already collapsed against the window, so I'm going to have to lean across and reach and grab one each time. In fact, I'm on my swivelly chair, so apologies if I swivel a lot. I try not to, but I've decided for this year I really quite like videoing in this position. It's easier to set up, and I think the light's probably better. So anyway, so I might just wheel myself forward apologies, and for the close-up, and pick my book number 10 in my order of books, and these are all books obviously that I would highly recommend to you, but for a variety of reasons. So those of you who have been watching my channel for some time, I'm just trying to position that so it's not glaring at you, will know that my specialism is classics. I did a degree in classics many decades ago, and I love all things classical and all things historical. So historical fiction is a very favourite genre of mine. And this book, Clytemnestra by Costanza Casati, has been recommended to me over and over and over again. And I did my usual thing and buried my head in the sand and thought, I'm not going to read that until I feel like reading it, which is really silly. But it blew me away, this novel, because there have been lots and lots and lots of retellings of ancient classical mythological stories in the last decade. Really, it's become very, very trendy, and I'm obviously absolutely over the moon about that. Anything that sort of popularises the ancient world, I'm up for. But maybe I was getting a bit tired. Maybe I thought if I read another one, it's just not going to be as good as some of the others I read. I thought this was an amazing retelling of the story of Clytemnestra. I mean, she's got one of the most belting stories in classical myth anyway. It's not a happy tale, and you know, I'm going to mention a few spoilers here now, so apologies if you haven't read it, but I think, you know, it's quite widely well known, this, and I think very important to your understanding of the book anyway. So Clytemnestra ultimately was married to Agamemnon, who set off on an expedition to recapture Helen, his sister-in-law, from the clutches of the Trojan Paris, who had abducted her. And obviously this was a massive insult to his family, and it was in his interest to get her back. In the process, he assembles a huge fleet at a place called Aulis, and all the leading Greek heroes are there, but there's no wind, so they can't sail. So this is pre the arrival in Troy. And it's a massive embarrassment to him. You know, they're waiting day after day after day. And ultimately a priest tells him, well, if you sacrifice your daughter, Iphigenia, you will be able to sail. So he sets up this deception where he, in most versions of the myth anyway, there are different versions, where he writes or sends a messenger, more likely, to his wife and says, send our daughter, she's going to marry Achilles, this is a great honour. And of course that's not his intention at all. Now I'm telling you that because this book makes Clytemnestra's reaction to that event, it makes her, what she then does to her husband, which is really shocking by any standards. It makes you empathise with her behaviour in a way that almost, and I thought that was brilliant. You know, you thought the novel makes you fully understand her actions and the difficulties, the complexities of the situation that she's in. And it does it because it backtracks and tells in a lot of detail Clytemnestra's backstory, which you don't normally get. And the backstory, you know, beautifully frames what then succeeds from it, or at least it does in Costanza Casati's hands. I think this is really well written. It captures the rawness, the primitive nature of early society. I love the focus on the pressure to marry and what that does to people and why it was so important in the culture that she's writing about. I love the Spartanness of Clytemnestra. I loved her relationship with her sister Helen. I loved her relationship with her parents. I think this is brilliantly written. It's a very feminist interpretation, and very powerful storytelling. So that's my number 10. So it can only get even better. And what a beautiful look at the spreadsheets. What a beautiful edition that is. And then next up, zooming forward and leering at you, is Tell Me Everything by Elizabeth Strout. So this is my number 9. Now, Elizabeth Strout is an American writer. She's written many novels. She's sort of, you know, quite advanced in her career, shall we say. And I have only read, to my shame, one of her other books. And I think that one of the things I'd love to think I might do this year is to backtrack and read some more of these novels, because I just love the way that Elizabeth Strout writes about the minutiae of life and about really quite ordinary people doing very ordinary things. She writes about love beautifully in here. I think she's asking questions about what love is, and you know, how important it is to human survival, really. In this novel we encounter Lucy Barton, who there's a whole series of other novels about, and she has established a friendship with Bob Burgess. In fact, it's quite a sort of romantic, I would say, friendship. He's defending a local, and Bob, all of these characters apparently have appeared in her other novels, but I didn't feel I needed to know any of that. The novel, what's wonderful is this novel, I think, stands up beautifully in its own right. Bob is defending an outsider from a sort of a conviction for murdering his mother. I think I've got that right. And also in this novel we meet Olive Kitteridge, who is another of Elizabeth Strout's characters. Now don't let that put you off, because Lucy Barton and Olive Kitteridge get to know each other in here, and Lucy pops round to Olive's, and Olive is quite a prickly character, but she tells Lucy stories, and Lucy Barton's a writer, but Olive's stories are just fabulous. So, you know, Lucy keeps popping back to Olive's for these stories, and they're just stories about people she knows, you know, what's going on in the lives of the people around her. but they are wonderful. And for me, that was what really made this novel, was reading about ordinary people going about doing ordinary things, but actually how extraordinary some of those things are. I loved it. And the writing, it's crisp, it's clear, it's so well executed without you even realising it. I think it's genius. And then coming in at number 8, I have Kitchen by Banana Yoshimoto. I can't believe I read this book this year. It seems ages ago since I read it. And I know I've talked about it several times on different videos as the years progressed, because this book completely and utterly stayed with me. It's actually 2 short stories. So it's not really a novella, I would say. But I just think they are both stories, but in particular the first one, Kitchen, is so beautifully told. It tells the story of a young girl whose grandmother's died, and therefore she has nowhere to live because she's been living with her grandmother. She doesn't have parents, and she has an acquaintance of her grandma's who appears and offers to and invites her around, and ultimately offers to take her in. But what's really interesting is that this woman who has taken her in is actually transgender. And the way that that is explained and written about in the novel is just beautiful. It's so subtle. It's a kind of, it's a novel about awakening. It's a novel about how you can find love and strength in the most unusual places. And it's really hard hitting. It's gentle and beautiful, but it also packs a punch. And I just thought this was sensational. And reaching forward to my collapsed heap, I have at number 7 this huge tome. Now, again, I think this won the Booker. It either won or it's certainly shortlisted a few years ago, and there was a lot of noise around this book. It's The Bee Sting, as you can see, by Paul Murray, and I don't know why I put off reading it for so long. I've had it on my shelves for ages. But sometimes it's lovely to come to a novel at the right time. I think one of the things that put me off is it is a very chunky novel, and when I'm reading a chunky novel, I like to have a stretch of time where I can actually, approach it without too much interruption. And sometimes in a busy life that's quite difficult to find. Oh my goodness, I just love this book. It's a brilliant family saga, that's how I would describe it. Paul Murray is Irish, it's set in Ireland. It's an Irish family who have come good, they've run a business, they're big shots in the town, but they've suddenly lost all their money, and so their lives just completely turn upside down. It's mother, father, daughter, son, and there are different sections in the book where you get the story of each character, and everything sort of revolves around the original marriage between the mother and father, and the images of bees and the importance of the bee sting doesn't really totally hit home right until the end of the story. I thought the novel was brilliantly structured, brilliantly written. It's that wonderful, the Irish really do have, the gift of the gab, and seem to be able to tell stories in a way that you feel as though, this sounds very dodgy, but as I'm reading it, I feel as though I'm sat on Paul Murray's knee and he's telling me the story, orally rather than through the page. You just sort of want to curl up and just listen to his voice in your head. I thought the characters were so realistic and really varied, and just, I couldn't put it down. And it's witty, there are moments of real humour in here as well. So I commend The Bee Sting to you. And then a book that, when I actually thought about it, this was sort of higher up my rankings than I thought, and it surprised me in a way, because on the surface of it, it's quite a slight book, but there is so much in it. And actually, in some ways, I'm sort of regretting I didn't put it nearer the top of my top 10. But this is Blackwood's Blue Sky by Ivey, who is the most fantastic human being. as well as being, I look like I'm poking Athena in the eye there. Actually, I don't, is it Athena? Can't remember. Anyway, so I was went to listen to my son Simon interview Yoan Ivey when she came over earlier on this year to promote this novel. So I read it very quickly after I'd seen that event because it really piqued my interest. And I just think this is such an unusual novel, and I mean, on the surface of it, there are some very much used tropes in it. So, you know, you've got an unmarried woman with a young daughter who is struggling to make ends meet. She works in a cafe, but she's really, really interested in nature, and she forms a relationship with Arthur, who is not quite what he seems, and it's very sort of animalistic, their relationship. And eventually Arthur suggests to her and her daughter that they go and live in this cabin in the middle of nowhere, basically. And people around her are sort of suggesting this might not be the most sensible thing to do. In particular, Arthur's father, who brought him up, he's really concerned about her and her daughter going off with Arthur, even though he clearly loves and cares for Arthur very much. And this novel asks all sorts of questions about, you know, what is the difference between man and an animal? We are, after all, animals. What does animal instinct mean? You know, it's really questioning the nature of love. It's a novel which describes its environment beautifully. Yoan Ivey is from Alaska, so the novel's set there, and you know, having read the novel, I feel I've come as close as I would to having been there, unless I went there, if that makes sense. So I think the setting and the surroundings in this novel are really important. I loved the little girl. I loved the character of her. I think she's called Emmeline. I thought she was beautifully written. And this is a novel that Yoan Ivey had mulling around in her head for many, many, many years. And I think it's her best novel yet. And I've absolutely loved all her books so far. I think there've been 3. And I've read them all, and I just think she just keeps getting better and better. Magnificent. And next up, and this is the book that threw everything out of kilter. In fact, the next 2 books, I can't really hold a paper between them. I could quite easily switch them the other way around. And so my novel number 6, yes, 2, 4, no, novel number 5, oh dear, I just nearly cheated it of a spot on the ranking. My 5th choice is How Much of These Hills is Gold by Zhang. Again, very late to the party, only just managed to squeeze this in before the end of the year. But I think this is a beautifully brutal, heartbreaking, thought-provoking novel about the immigrant life during the gold rush in America. It tells the story of 2 young children who are orphaned, and we start right at the beginning with the body of the father and how they deal with that. They're living in literally a chicken shed. They have nothing, and this is a story of how these children manage to be resilient. And you know, they encounter it's not for the faint-hearted, this novel. So there are some really grim things that happen, but they're travelling through the American West. They're left to their own devices. There is no support network, nobody to help them, and I just really enjoyed being on that journey with them. I found it really harrowing, some of the things they have to resort to. And the writing in this novel is stunning. It's stunningly beautiful. The landscape, the grass in particular, which is compared to gold on many occasions in the novel, will stay with me. I love the way the novel was structured, the way that you're swept between moments in time when you really don't feel you need to be and then realise you absolutely do need to be. I think it's the work of genius. Loved it. And at number 4... Dusk by Robbie Arnott, which was one of the first books I read this year, and it's a very similar. The tone of this novel, I feel, is really similar to the Sipam Zhang, because this tells the story of. I mean, they're adult twins, but they have similarly been neglected by their parents, because their parents were again immigrants to. In fact, I think they were convicts who were shipped over to Tasmania, and became alcohol dependent. So the twins have grown up in this very, very difficult, in difficult conditions. They've never settled anywhere. They've been migrant. Their parents were thieves. So, you know, life is very, very hard. And like the Sipam Zhang, the landscape in this novel, it's weird and otherworldly and fascinating. So, you know, this made me, it gave me the tingle that adventure stories gave me as a child. You feel like you're on an adventure with them, and basically there's a bounty for hunting down this puma called Dusk, which has been terrorising and, you know, killing humans. I love the characters. I love the landscape. There is something that happens towards the end of this book that is absolutely sensational, and I don't think I've seen another writer do it. So yeah, again, Robbie Arnott, favourite author, and I adored this novel. And then at number 3, the marvellous Elif Shafak with There Are Rivers in the Sky. I adored this. Well, I would have done. It's in my top 3. It's number 3. Because it's, I mean, for me personally, this is the sort of book that if I could, I would write myself. It's about the ancient world. It's about a Victorian young man called Arthur, who again grows up in desperate circumstances, very sort of Dickensian part of the plot, because there are 3 parallel narratives in this novel. So one of them surrounds Arthur, and he comes from poverty, but he gets an education. And he's there when they bring the lamassus, the Mesopotamian beautiful carvings, into the British Museum and sees them. And it starts this lifelong fixation for all things Mesopotamian. And he decides that he's going to be the one who will decode the Assyrian alphabet. And that whole journey that it takes Arthur on is absolutely wonderful. And the way that Elif Shafak plays with our emotions in this novel is really clever. Like, you know, the things that you think might happen to Arthur and don't, you sort of, she teases you, I think. You know, you think you're going to predict where the novel's going to go, and it doesn't go there. But it also tells the story of Narin, who is a Yazidi girl. So it's really political, this novel, because that section of the novel is set in 2014 in Turkey. And it's looking at the way that communities are being manipulated and moved around because of the climate change and the need, the requirement for water, and how, you know, you can build a dam in one place, but that then deprives people of water further downstream. So it really opened my eyes to that whole aspect of global politics that I think I'd been a little bit blind to, or not really understood quite the significance of. So I felt this was a book that really educated me. And then you've also got the story of Zulika, who's a hydrologist and has just separated from her partner, her husband, and she again was orphaned and taken on by her extremely wealthy uncle. She's just bought a canal boat on the river. So this is a book very much about London, but also about other places too. And I could talk about this book for a very, very long time. I just thought it was beautiful. The only reason it's not my number 1 is because I just felt Narin's story, it took me a long, long time to really quite understand the full force of it, and I thought that was a little bit of a shame. I just adored it. And it's also the sort of book that I love it when a novel springboards me into reading other things. So since I read this, I've read the Oxford collection of Mesopotamian myths, because it really interested me in that. And I'm partway through reading a non-fiction book about the Middle East, the ancient Middle East, to help me to understand all of that better. So it's a novel that has served up a lot of favours in terms of me then, you know, finding interests elsewhere, which is what a really good book should do. And then this was a real surprise. I read this book. This is The History of Love. So this is my number 2 for 2025, and it's by Nicole Krauss. And this was shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction in 2006. So when I joined their 30 and 30 campaign, this was the novel that I chose to read. Oh my goodness, I just adored it. And I thought it was really unusual, and the characters have completely stayed in my head. So it tells the story of Leo Gursky, who's a very elderly man who had to leave Poland, I think just before or at the outbreak of the Second World War, and he's living in Brooklyn. He's really down on his uppers. He feels that he's unseen. He just wants somebody to see him. And right towards the beginning of the novel, he answers an advert for a nude model for a life drawing class, and I just love his discomfort. I think the way that she writes about this elderly man is so thought-provoking and so true to, I suspect, lots of elderly people's lived experience. I thought that was fantastic. And then you've got the story of Alma, who's a young girl whose mother is really lonely, can't get over the death of her father, and her mother can't get over the death of her husband. And she's worried about her mother's loneliness and is trying to do something about it. And that also involves a book, because her mother has been sent this book, this mysterious book, to translate. And what I hadn't said was that Leo Gursky had written a book. So gradually these two completely separate characters, you're wondering how on earth their lives are going to become entangled, and it's not quite in the way you expect either. So Alma she narrates part of it, Leo narrates part of it, and they sort of alternate. And Alma's narration is quite fragmentary as well, so they're very distinctly different, which is something that I always appreciate in an author, when they've managed to do that. I loved Alma. I thought she was a really thoughtful, observant, quite driven young woman coming to terms with the world. I think she's about 15. And I also love the character of her younger brother, who's a real worry. He's very, very eccentric, and it tugs at your heartstrings, but it also makes you smile. This is a novel that will stay with me for many, many years. But finally, what is my number 1 pick for 2025? Well, it is The Mare by Angharad, Hampshire. I thought this book, it just took my breath away. I didn't know much about it when I sat down to read it, which sometimes I think is a really, really good thing. It tells the story of, it fictionalises a real, true life story. The story of Hermine Braunsteiner, who was the first person to be extradited from America for war crimes after the Second World War, because she was a female concentration camp commandant, and they referred to her as the Mare because she literally kicked people to death. And I had no idea that there were women who had done things like that. I felt really, again, this was a book that really educated me. But what I think is so clever about this is that you have two perspectives. So Angharad, Hampshire did something so brave. She took on the persona of the Mare. So half of this book is narrated through Hermine's eyes, and I think that's an incredibly courageous thing to do. she's not empathising, but she's she's trying to understand. She's certainly not sympathising, but she's trying to understand how a very ordinary young girl who grows up on a farm in Austria ends up doing what she did. And I think that we could all benefit from trying to travel around in other people's shoes a bit more often, and also that's obviously what good fiction should do. Now I'm sounding a bit preachy, sorry. But the other thing that I think the thing that absolutely makes this novel is that the other half of the story is narrated by Hermione's American husband, who had no knowledge of her involvement in the concentration camps during the war. He was an American airman. The novel, right near the beginning of the novel, there's a knock on their door in America where they've been happily married for quite a number of years, and it's a journalist from the New York Times, and he says, you know, does Hermione Brownsteiner live here? And it all unfolds. I'm not going to say any more, but it is so well written, and I think this novel has a very interesting journey, because I came across it thanks to the wonderful Walter Scott Prize. If you're a fan of historical fiction, I decided to read the shortlist this year, and I'm so glad I did. This novel is going to be republished this year, 2026, and I'm really looking forward to seeing where it takes it, because I think it's got a very exciting journey ahead of it. I think it was largely overlooked last year, and I think it's a really wonderful book. Anyway, there we are. That's my top 10. So I'd love to know what you think. Please put your comments below. Let me know what your favourite book of the year was, or even your top 3, or possibly your top 5, I don't know. I always love to find out more. And yeah, I hope you've enjoyed my video, and yeah, speak to you all very soon, I hope. Take care. Bye.